Welcome back to our year with our disciplines and our month with generosity. And so far, we've really focused on generosity as being a fruit of the gospel, and we'll continue to do that because generosity is not a work. Um, and our reason for this is not just to split theological hairs, but because this is where we find our great hope. That if generosity was the law, that we would need to make ourselves more generous. But knowing that it's about grace means that we turn not to ourselves, to our own resources to become more generous, but we turn to the Lord and in fact are made generous because as we've said, generosity is a fruit. And fruit is inevitable, right? A tree doesn't say, "Oh, I need to bear fruit," right? A tree just bears fruit because it's a tree. And so, generosity is something that we will be made into, not something that we have to make ourselves into. I guess is the it's probably a little confusing, but I think you get the point, right? That you don't make yourself generous. The generosity flows from something that you have been made into, which is a child of God. All right. So last week we spoke about generosity in terms of relationships, meaning that we approach one another, not with suspicion, but with openness, and that we're quick to forgive because we have been forgiven, and that we seek to lift each other up and to bless others because we have been blessed. And today I want to shift our discussion about generosity to time. And as I repeatedly have said, this may be the most difficult one for us, not only here in Williamson County, but just in our culture of America in general. I've shared the experience before, but it really bears sharing again, that when we were first moving to Franklin and I was in a group with someone else who was in the same church that we were in, and we were just listening to them talk about how much more they needed to be engaged and be hands-on, and how we need to be a community and getting involved in people's lives. And I said, "Oh, that's great, because we're moving on such and such a day. Would you be able to help us, unload the truck?" And it was just crickets, as you might imagine. And then he laughed and said, "No, but I will write you a check." And it was okay for him to laugh, right? Because we all realize that we find ourselves in those absurd moments that we do, I think, genuinely want to spend more time with people to help and engage them, but we all just live under this perception of being so busy. And go back to our Sabbath videos to get a more in-depth sense of why it's so hard for us to slow down. But for today, I just want us to think about what is driving your busyness, and don't be too quick to answer and say something like my boss or my kids' activities. Those so often are scapegoats to what's really driving our schedules. And most often it's our need to perform. And why do we need to perform? And so that we can feel like we're loved. And here's why that's really important in terms of generosity, is that if so often our busyness is about us, about something that we get, it's about what we get from being busy, be it praise or self-worth or meeting, that these really are idols that need to be smashed, not only because you will never work enough to feel the worth and value that is offered freely to you by God. That's the most important, part of this sentence, but also because the time you spend with others, you will inevitably make it all about you. And you know what I'm talking about here, that you have been in a conversation with someone where you realize they just wanted someone to tell how awesome they are, or you're invited over to dinner just so that the host or hostess could show off. This is not generosity. This is using people. So it's important for us to spend some time with this issue so that maybe it can be a bit less about us. And I just want to continue to say, and yes, you can laugh about this because we are all, myself included, so self-centered, right? But there is just an incredible grace of God that allows us to open up and love our neighbor from time to time. So just the path to being able to experience that freedom is to consider, why are we making this all by ourselves, all about ourselves, sorry. And it is idolatry, but there's another piece that I think might be helpful, is that we are starved for connection, that we live in perhaps one of the most connected times in human history, which by all accounts is also the loneliest. And so what I'm saying in all this is that maybe the problem isn't technical. It isn't that we really don't have the time to connect, that we don't have the ability to connect, or even the technology to connect, but it has something to do with our heart. And that's why it's time. That's why it's important to take time to consider those questions I asked. But it also means that one of the most powerful witnesses of Christian love in our culture, I think, may be the willingness of Christians to just actually take the time to sit with others. Right? To make the time to speak with your neighbor rather than just waving to them on the way to the garage. And people are longing for genuine connection. So much so that they might find it odd at first for someone to offer it, or to think there's a hidden agenda. But just keep at it, and people are usually won over by genuineness. And if they're not, well, that has more to do with them than you. But here's just one way that you can do this, and I've spoken of this before. But in the same way that the Israelites left the edges of their fields unharvested to allow those in need to collect grain, leave the ends of your day, whatever those are. You can consider your day or your schedule a field. Find some of those ends, and just leave them unscheduled. Create some margin. Not so that you can fill it in each week, but so that if someone in need, or someone finds himself in need, or if someone just wants to sit on the porch with you, where there's the space to do that. And yes, if you don't have a front porch, well, now you should probably take some time and build one, and then invite someone over. But that there is a lot of there's some really powerful research on some of the realities of what happened in our communities when we shifted from front porches to back porches. So I don't mean that entirely, tongue in cheek. That part of our isolation and our is a result of our architecture as well. But you get my point, which is just simply first find a way to create the space, and then just ask the Lord to bring to you those in need, and God will be faithful in all those things. All right. I think that I've taken up enough of your time, pun intended, for this week, and I'll see you next week for our last video. All right, bye.